At 83 years old, Harrison Ford has finally admitted the truth about Carrie Fisher. For decades, their story was whispered about, half confirmed, and wrapped in the shadow of Star Wars. To the world, they were Han Solo and Princess Leia, two characters locked in a galaxy-wide romance. But off-screen there was something more, something Harrison never spoke of, not even when Carrie herself revealed it to the world. In 1976, when the cameras rolled for the very first Star Wars film, Carrie was only 19. Harrison was 34, married, and already a father. The chemistry between them was undeniable, too real to be contained to the set. For 3 months, they lived a secret life together, hidden from the cast and crew, hidden from the world. Carrie would eventually write about it, with honesty and humor, in her memoir. But Harrison, he stayed silent. Decades passed, tributes came and went, and still he held back. Now at 83, Harrison Ford has finally broken that silence. His admission is not the easy kind. It is the kind that trembles with regret, the kind that carries the weight of what was never said when Carrie was alive. And it leaves one question echoing. Why did he wait until now to finally tell the truth? Before Harrison Ford became a household name, before the fedora and the whip of Indiana Jones, before the iconic smirk of Han Solo, he was a struggling actor in Hollywood. In the mid-70s, he was already in his 30s, a husband and a father of 2 children, working as a carpenter just to make ends meet between small acting jobs. His career hadn't taken off yet, and by all accounts, Harrison Ford was just another face waiting for a break. That break came when George Lucas cast him as a cocky, reluctant smuggler in a little science fiction project nobody believed would succeed. Across the Atlantic in London, a very different story was unfolding. Carrie Fisher, barely 19, fresh from a Hollywood upbringing as the daughter of Eddie Fisher and Debbie Reynolds, was stepping into her first major role. She was still finding her footing as a young woman, but she carried an energy, sharp, witty, fearless, that cut through every room she entered. On the set of Star Wars: A New Hope, the cast was a mixture of unknowns and veterans. Mark Hamill, wide-eyed and eager; Alec Guinness, stoic and commanding. And then there were Harrison and Carrie, thrown together in long days of filming, exchanging lines that blurred the line between fiction and reality. The chemistry between Han Solo and Princess Leia wasn't manufactured. It was raw, immediate, and undeniable. When cameras stopped rolling, the laughter lingered. Glances stretched too long. Conversations ran late into the night. Carrie herself would later admit that she was swept up in the whirlwind. Harrison, with his quiet charm and steady confidence, was unlike anyone she had known. He was older, experienced, and carrying a weight she couldn't yet name. For him, Carrie was a spark of youth and mischief that lit up the long days of shooting. Together they slipped into a rhythm that nobody else on set quite noticed, or maybe they did, but chose not to say. It wasn't just attraction. It was secrecy. Harrison was married, and that knowledge hung over every moment they shared. Yet in the bubble of filming far from Los Angeles, they carved out their own world. 3 months that would never be forgotten, though for decades almost no one spoke of it. Looking back, those early days on the set of Star Wars didn't just launch 2 acting careers. They ignited a story that fans would speculate about for generations. Carrie was still a teenager, living on her own terms for the first time. Harrison was navigating ambition, responsibility, and temptation. The way they collided was messy, complicated, but unforgettable. And this is where the silence began. Even as the original Star Wars trilogy cemented their bond in the eyes of the world, Harrison and Carrie never revealed what had truly unfolded behind the scenes. For the public, it was only Han and Leia. For them, it was something neither could name, not yet. But silence can only last so long. Carrie Fisher would eventually tell the world what had happened in London in 1976, and when she did, the world gasped. But why didn't Harrison Ford speak then? Why did he let Carrie tell their story alone, while he stayed hidden in silence? For nearly 4 decades, the whispers stayed just that. Whispers. Fans speculated, journalists hinted, and insiders offered knowing smiles, but nothing was confirmed. Harrison Ford, famously private, had built a reputation for guarding his personal life as tightly as any Hollywood star could. He rarely gave interviews that strayed beyond the work. When pressed about his past, he deflected with humor or silence. The story of Carrie and Harrison became one of those Hollywood rumors too tantalizing to dismiss, too unconfirmed to fully believe. Then came 2016, the year Carrie Fisher released The Princess Diarist. Inside its pages was the confession the world had waited decades to hear. With her trademark wit and candor, Carrie pulled the curtain back on what really happened during those months in London. She admitted that she and Harrison Ford had been lovers throughout the filming of Star Wars: A New Hope. It wasn't speculation anymore. It was fact printed in her own words. The revelations were staggering, not just because of the affair itself, but because of the honesty with which Carrie delivered them. She described her own insecurity, the way she was swept into a relationship with a man nearly twice her age, married, and already an established figure. She described nights spent together, stolen moments that blurred the lines between youth and adulthood, between fantasy and reality. Carrie didn't glorify it. She didn't vilify it. She simply told the truth she had carried for almost 40 years. The reaction was immediate. Fans devoured every detail. Headlines exploded across the world. What had been a half-remembered rumor suddenly became one of the most talked-about Hollywood confessions of the decade. Some saw it as scandalous, others as heartbreaking, still others as oddly fitting that Han and Leia, so fiery on screen, had been entangled off-screen as well. But through it all, one figure remained silent: Harrison Ford. While Carrie spoke with the clarity of someone who had lived through it and survived, Harrison refused to offer even a whisper. He didn't deny it. He didn't confirm it. He simply stood back, letting Carrie's voice echo alone. For the world, that silence became almost as fascinating as the affair itself. Why wouldn't he say something? Why wouldn't he acknowledge her story? For Harrison, silence had always been a shield. He valued privacy, and in many ways Carrie's candor was the exact opposite of his nature. Where she used humor to strip away artifice, he used restraint to hold it in place. The contrast between them was stark, and it only added to the mystique. Still, that silence carried a cost. Carrie's memoir gave her fans a piece of closure. It allowed her to share her story in her own words, on her own terms. Harrison's refusal to join the conversation left only questions. Did he regret it? Did he remember it differently? Or did he simply not know how to talk about a love he could never truly claim? What lingered long after Carrie's book was published was the imbalance of their voices. Hers was open, vulnerable, sometimes even raw. His was absent. For fans, it left the story unfinished. For Harrison, it meant carrying the burden of truth in private. But behind that silence, what was Harrison Ford really feeling? Was it guilt, denial, or something deeper? Something he only dared to admit when it was too late to tell Carrie herself. When Carrie Fisher passed away in December of 2016, the world grieved the loss of a sharp, fearless voice that had never been afraid to tell the truth. Tributes poured in from fans, friends, and colleagues, but one voice carried a different weight. Harrison Ford, the man who had been at her side in the early days of Star Wars and across its many returns, spoke only sparingly. Yet those few words revealed something deeper than decades of silence ever could. Harrison called her one of a kind, emotionally fearless, and lived her life bravely. For a man known for his reserve, it was more than a tribute. It was an admission of respect, admiration, and beneath it, love. Still, he stopped short of the intimacy that Carrie herself had once offered so freely. He praised her strength, her humor, her unmatched presence. But the undercurrent, The bond that had tied them together since 1976 remained unspoken. Even so, their connection was clear to anyone who looked closely. Carrie had described Harrison as quiet, steady, someone who seemed untouchable. She admitted she never stopped seeing him as a figure larger than life, even in private. Harrison, on the other hand, had built his career on roles that mirrored those qualities. Men of few words, strong actions, guarded emotions. With Carrie, however, something cracked. She could make him laugh when he wanted to remain serious. She could disarm him with a single line. That was the essence of their relationship, both on screen and off. She teased, he smirked. She challenged, he countered. It wasn't performance, it was the rhythm of two people who understood each other in ways the audience was never meant to see. Even decades later, when they reprised Han and Leia in The Force Awakens, the spark was intact. The banter didn't feel written, it felt remembered. Harrison's guarded tribute, after her passing, hinted at a private grief that few could imagine. Unlike Carrie, who had turned her vulnerabilities into art, Harrison carried his privately. His silence wasn't emptiness. It was weight, the weight of knowing that Carrie had spent her last years telling their story, while he had never given her an answer. The weight of realizing that now, he never could. And yet, in small ways, Harrison began to let the truth slip through. In interviews, he admitted that Carrie's death had hit him hard. He acknowledged that she had been a vital part of his life, not just as a co-star but as someone who had shaped him. There was a tenderness in his voice that fans had rarely heard before. For the first time, it was clear Carrie Fisher wasn't just a chapter in his career. She was a part of his life that could never be erased. This was the truth, hidden in plain sight. Behind Harrison Ford's gruff exterior, behind the reluctance to expose his private world, Carrie Fisher remained one of the few people who had ever truly reached him. He might never have shouted it from rooftops, but in his quiet, fractured way he loved her. But love mixed with silence often turns into regret, and for Harrison Ford, the regret of what he never told Carrie would become heavier with each passing year. By the time Harrison Ford reached his 80s, his life looked full on paper. He had been married 3 times, fathered 5 children, starred in some of the most successful films in history, and built a reputation as one of Hollywood's most enduring legends. Yet even a life stacked with triumph can be shadowed by what might have been. For Harrison, that shadow was Carrie Fisher. Carrie's passing in 2016 didn't just end the possibility of new memories together. It sealed off the chance to ever say what had remained unsaid. In interviews, Harrison revealed little, but the grief in his eyes was impossible to miss. Fans noticed the catch in his voice, the pauses that lingered too long. For a man who had spent his career hiding behind characters, the mask had slipped, and what lay beneath it was regret. Carrie herself had been open about her struggles, addiction, mental health, the ups and downs of relationships. She often joked about being unlucky in love, about choosing the wrong men, about the chaos that defined her personal life. But behind those jokes was a truth: she wanted to be loved fully and without hesitation. For decades, she carried the memory of Harrison as one of the few who had made her feel seen. Yet she also carried the pain of his distance. He never gave her the words she longed for. He never claimed her openly. Harrison's regret was not just about the affair itself. It was about the silence that followed. When Carrie confessed their story to the world in her memoir, she was offering him an opening, a chance to acknowledge her, to say that she mattered to him as much as he mattered to her. Instead, he stayed quiet. He told himself it was out of respect for privacy, for his family, for his own nature. But silence has a cost, and when Carrie died, that cost became unbearable. Those who knew Harrison best describe a man who often avoided emotional confrontation. He was pragmatic, focused on work, never one for sentiment. Yet age has a way of softening the hardest edges. In his 80s, looking back on the women he had loved and lost, Carrie's absence loomed largest. She had been fearless enough to tell the truth, while he had been too cautious. That imbalance haunted him. Every tribute to Carrie from her friends carried warmth and celebration. Mark Hamill spoke openly about how much he adored her. Others described her generosity, her humor, her brilliance. Harrison's words, though respectful, seemed restrained. Because they were. He admitted only fragments of what he felt, leaving the rest locked inside. And that is the core of his regret. He never gave Carrie the full truth while she was here to hear it. Now, when Harrison speaks about her, there is a tremor, a heaviness. He admits that she was unforgettable, that she shaped his life in ways few ever could. But he also admits, finally, that his silence was a mistake, that waiting cost him the chance to tell her what she truly meant. And so at 83, Harrison Ford has let the truth slip at last. But what exactly has he confessed about Carrie Fisher, the woman who changed his life and the love he never claimed until it was too late? For most of his career, Harrison Ford deflected personal questions with a grin, a shrug, or a sharp change of subject. He let his characters carry the emotions he wouldn't show in public, but time has a way of stripping down defenses. And as Harrison reached 83, the truth he had avoided for decades finally surfaced. In recent reflections, Harrison admitted what so many had long suspected but never heard from his lips. Carrie Fisher was not just a co-star, not just a fleeting romance hidden in the chaos of filming. She was the person who reached him in ways no one else ever had. The chemistry the world saw on screen was real because the bond behind it was real. And though he never put it into words when she was alive, she mattered to him in a way that never faded. What makes his admission so striking is not simply that it confirms the affair. That part Carrie had already revealed. What Harrison finally confessed was his regret for never telling her the full truth, that he loved her in his own quiet way, that she was unforgettable, irreplaceable, and part of him long after their brief romance ended. For decades, he had locked that confession away, buried under his need for privacy and restraint. At 83, the weight of silence became heavier than the risk of honesty. When he spoke of her, there was no longer the guarded distance of earlier years. Instead, there was vulnerability. He described Carrie as brilliant, brave, endlessly funny. He acknowledged that her death left him shaken in ways he hadn't expected. And in those words, fans heard what he had never openly said, that Carrie Fisher was in many ways the great love he never claimed. The power of this revelation lies in its timing. It comes not in the flush of youth or the glow of stardom, but in the reflective twilight of Harrison's life. At 83, there are no roles left to hide behind, no press tours to distract him. What remains is the truth, and the regret of waiting too long to speak it. For fans, his admission is both heartbreaking and healing. Heartbreaking because Carrie is no longer here to hear it. Healing because it affirms what so many always sensed, that behind the banter, behind the secrecy, there was love. Real, complicated, imperfect love. And so, Harrison Ford's final confession about Carrie Fisher is not a scandal or a salacious detail. It is something far more human. It is the acknowledgement that he carried feelings he never expressed, that he missed his chance to tell her, and that he now lives with the echo of those unsaid words. Which leaves us with one lingering truth. Harrison Ford has finally admitted his love, but the question that will haunt him forever is this: why did it take until now? The story of Harrison Ford and Carrie Fisher is not just another Hollywood rumor brought into the light. It is the story of two people bound together by circumstance, by chemistry, and by the roles that defined their lives. Han and Leia will always live in the imagination of millions, but behind the costumes and scripts were two human beings who found each other in a fleeting, impossible moment. Carrie Fisher chose to tell that story while she was still here. She gave her fans the truth, unpolished and unapologetic. Harrison Ford chose silence, a silence that lasted for decades. And yet, in the stillness of his later years, He has finally allowed himself to say what so many suspected all along: that Carrie mattered to him, that she changed him, that his silence was not absence, but fear. At 83, his confession is not about rekindling scandal or rewriting history. It is about something simpler, something that resonates far beyond Hollywood. It is about the words we fail to say when the people who most deserve to hear them are still alive. It is about how love, when left unspoken, can harden into regret. Fans will forever debate what might have been if Harrison and Carrie had taken a different path. But the truth that Harrison Ford has finally admitted is this: their connection was real, it was deep, and it never truly left him. And though Carrie Fisher is gone, his words now stand as a tribute to the bond they shared, imperfect, hidden, but unforgettable. For more emotional stories, check out this video.